And we're now joined by Associate Professor Robert Kelly from the Department of Political Science and Diplomacy at Pusan National University. Today's missile launches, they're Pyongyang's fifth this year. There seems to be this huge rush to perfect technology. What do you think is prompting this level of activity?
I do think that Kim Jong-un is feeling isolated, particularly after the Workers' Party Congress of last month. I think that North Korea is increasingly concerned about whether or not China will stand with it. The rift between China and North Korea is now pretty wide. There's been some effort to close that, but I think increasingly North Korea sees itself as somewhat on its own, and therefore it needs these missiles, it needs these tests. Not having nuclear weapons is not enough. The North Koreans need a delivery vehicle, they need a platform to do that. Their Air Force is a joke, and so missiles are the only way they have to test. Otherwise, they can't use the nukes they have.
Well, North Korea remains defiant despite renewed warnings from the US, Japan and China in the face of international sanctions. Is the message that Pyongyang is trying to send out for domestic audiences or for international or for both?
It's for both. North Korea needs to explain to its own people why they live in a permanent state of privation and emergency, and one of the ways that it does that is by constantly keeping the war drums going. Right, there need to be a constant sort of slew of tests and provocations and things like that, because that explains the rolling autocracy in North Korea, the permanent state of material deprivation that the people live in. Right, abroad, it's also important for North Korea because the real concern is that there might be some kind of regime change action against North Korea. This is the big reason for the nuclear program as well, right, to prevent something like what happened to Saddam Hussein a decade ago, and that's why the North Koreans do this. I mean, they're genuinely afraid that there's going to be some kind of strike or something like that, right, and they're sort of balancing their need to sort of tell the world to stay out of their business, while on the other hand not provoking the world so much that they actually get some kind of strike or some kind of missile attack on the missile sites.
Robert, we do know that several of the Musudan tests have failed. How successful has North Korea been in developing intermediate-range missiles that are capable of delivering a nuclear warhead as far as the United States?
Yeah, that's the difference, right? I think the North Koreans are doing now, what they're trying to do now is develop a missile that can strike Guam, which is the largest American military installation out here in the Asia Pacific. That's what these are, the Musudan. These are medium-range missiles. These would be able to strike all of Japan, as your correspondent noted, and they would also be able to hit Guam. They'd also be able to hit Beijing, which is important to note, too. And then come the intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that, of course, means striking the United States. That's much harder, right? Not only because you have to sort of put a lot more fuel in the rest of it, but you also have to be able to guide the missiles into a target, which is quite difficult for the North Koreans, right? That requires high technology. The Soviets and the Chinese never did that particularly well. So I'm not so much worried about striking the continent of the United States. My big concern is Guam.
But you were rather dismissive earlier about the North's sort of military capability beyond missiles. Can you sort of elaborate on that? What's the North's true military capability?
Yeah, that's also sort of another point of big discussion in the analyst community. My own sense is that the Korean People's Army, the KPA, right, it's sort of framed around fighting a war akin to the first one in 1950, right? That is sort of like a massive military clash, which just simply isn't how the United States fights conflicts anymore, right? So there's a general sense that if there was a war between the North and the South, that the South would win, particularly with the weight of American air and naval power behind it, and that nuclear weapons are designed to make up for that gap. I mean, it's really hard, of course. The KPA doesn't provide us with a great deal of information, so it's hard for us to know, but we do believe that they have a real problem with training, that they don't have enough fuel, for example, to power their armored vehicles and to do jet training and things like that. So we're working on the assumption to be a massive infantry clash, which is simply just not the way the United States fights conflicts anymore, and so the nuclear weapons are probably meant to fill in for that.
Okay, many thanks for sharing your thoughts this evening. Associate Professor Robert Kelly there from the Pusan National University.